Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics. And tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. Typically, we're out here on Monday nights at the beautiful downtown Cowtown at the Isis Theater showing. Each month we have a different theme, and each film fits in within that theme. But we're doing something a little bit different, and I wish it could be under better circumstances. But on July 30th of this year, we lost a great comic legend, a true luminary of stage and screen. And I don't use those terms lightly. Paul Reubens passed away of cancer at the age of 70. And I know it was a shock for a lot of his fans because, from my understanding, he kept it secret a long time. But I grew up watching Paul's work. Of course, Pee-wee's Big Adventure is one of my favorite comedies of all time. It's such a wonderful film. I was lucky enough to see it on the big screen just a couple of weeks ago, and to me, it plays just as well and it's just as hilarious as you remember as a kid. But joining us tonight, I have the pleasure of sitting down with film historian, archivist, and journalist, Mr. Michael H. Price. How are you doing tonight, Michael?
Well, glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to have you. What was your earliest exposure to the Pee Wee Herman character?
I had caught up with him to an extent in The Groundlings,
Really, so
the
early
comedy troupe of
before?
Los Angeles, that also gave us, well, such talents as as Cassie Peterson's Elvira character, among many others.
Yes.
I didn't really pay a lot of attention until Pee Wee Herman started breaking loose and being in the newspaper business. One need not be a fan so much as to be up to date on the pop culture scene. So this Pee Wee Herman, whom some fellow critics kept trying to liken to Jerry Lewis, impressed me as no such thing. He was an original character cut out of whole cloth, and had the good fortune of meeting up with him on the publicity tour for Pee Wee's Big Adventure.
Okay, so that was the first time you had met him, but you were already aware of his previous work.
Oh yeah, yeah, and impressive work it was too, because he completely shed all ambitions in a childlike manner. I found him mostly comparable to my friend Rudy Ray Moore, who played a larger than life character called Dolomite
Yes,
in
yeah.
the black exploitation movies of the 1970s, and like Pee-wee in civilian life, Rudy Ray Moore was a very scholarly, serious-minded uh, custodian of black comedy
Hmm.
who worked his knowledge into this tougher than leather, bigger than life character that he called Dolomite. And you saw a lot of that kind of invention going on with Pee Wee Herman, except Pee Wee he seemed to channel the great kid show entertainers of the mid-century, like Pinky Lee and Soupy Sales.
Hmm.
But it was a completely whole cloth character all his own.
Hmm. And my understanding was he had originally developed this character for a stage show in the late 70s, early 80s. He did stand-up comedian, and then through the Groundlings, he developed this into the Pee Wee Herman show on stage.
Right.
Yeah.
A stage character like no other. Although if you talked to Paul Reubens, you'd realize that he was very well aware of historical comedy landmarks, like
Hmm.
Stan Laurel, like
Yeah.
Charlie Chaplin,
Hmm.
and of course, like Jerry Lewis, but unlike Jerry Lewis, in that the character was invented. The interviews we had, fortunately, he was out of character for these interviews. Sometimes did interviews in his Pee Wee character. Um, he talked in a very scholastic manner about his admiration for the benchmarks, the Stan
Hmm.
Laurels and such,
Oh, and
and
I think
that's kind of unusual.
those influences are evident on screen. And since you did mention Jerry Lewis, it's interesting a character like Pee Wee, even though the film isn't sound, the humor, it's so kind of distinctive and relatable. I feel like it would play well in different countries, even translated into different languages.
Pee-wee is an innocent. Sometimes he is not a polite innocent, and he is capable of uh, moments of really bad temper, but he's basically an innocent like Great Britain's Mr. Bean character.
Yeah. Oh, so when you met Mr. Reubens for the first time, was he doing a press tour in Texas? Is that where you met him, or how did you end
Came
up
through,
chatting with
came
him?
through, came through Dallas, and then we met again on a Los Angeles leg of the press tour.
But what was your impression of him just as a person getting to talk with him?
A comfortable fellow with his own self. That is, being oneself, comfortable in his own skin. And he knew that he had invented something. He didn't lose himself in the character like say Robin Williams would lose himself in his characters while in civilian life.
Yeah.
Uh, it reminded me more, if you're comparing comedians, of Great Britain's John Cleese,
Oh yeah.
who tremendously funny on camera, but dead serious and almost professorial in person.
Hmm.
I was working with the great Shakespearean William Marsh in Dallas at the Junior Black Academy during the 1980s, and of course Marshall was kind of semi-famous at the time as the king of cartoons on the Pee Wee Herman Kid Show. He would serve to introduce the animated segment of the Pee Wee, and his line was, "Let the cartoon begin." And asked him about his what led you to that. I mean, Marshall had been um, a not not too busy working actor in mid-century Hollywood. This, of course, at a time when the big studios had room for maybe one or two leading black artists at a time. So he never quite broke through to that Sidney Poitier caliber, although he did have a splendid two-picture turn in the early 70s as Blackula,
Of course, yeah.
the Black Dracula, of course. And he wasn't down on his luck, but he was looking for work. His agent called Marshall and said, "There's a TV studio looking for auditioners, and here's where you go, and give them hell." And Marshall said he was introduced, and he's speaking in this rotund Shakespearean voice. And then he was sent to a waiting room where he would be introduced by a Mr. Reubens. He had no idea who this Mr. Reubens was. He waited there for a while, and finally he says, in comes this disheveled-looking Jewish fellow with a shadow and manner, like he hadn't gotten enough sleep the night before. And he's sitting there with Mr. Reubens, trying to get a handle on what this guy's about. Mr. Reubens is going through for William Marshall, and he reaches a certain point and then suddenly breaks into character, says, "Ha ha, you were Blackula, you're hired."
Oh wow.
So it happened. I mean, it was, and so you got to know, Paul Rubens was no dope when it came to pop culture literacy.
Yeah, oh, I can definitely
Uh,
imagine that. And what's fascinating, like you bring up, you previously mentioned Cassandra Peterson, of course, William Marshall. He seemed like he was certainly a guy who didn't mind taking risks and chances in giving people breaks in the show business.
oh dear, no, no, not at all. He had taken a flying leap into the Pee Wee character.
Yeah.
That was a risk.
Oh,
That
that
was a
was
very unconventional character. Jim Varney, during one of our interviews, when he was under contract as Ernest P. Worrell to Disney,
Mhm.
once spoke hopefully of a crossover between Pee Wee Herman and Ernest P. Worrell, uh, a Disney-fied version of the uh, story fairy tale about the town mouse and the country mouse.
Mhm.
And you can kind of guess who would be the town mouse and who would be the country mouse.
Right, right.
These great things that never happened. It's like you keep running across these things that were proposed, reached some stage of talking, if not development, and then disappeared into the ether.
What's fascinating about this film in particular, it has such a unique vision. The pacing is incredible. It's from one set piece to the next. And the subject matter is almost so bizarre, you can't imagine a major Hollywood studio taking that kind of risk today, like they would in 1984, 1985. But
Yeah,
one of the great careers that Paul Reubens opened the door for was a young director by the name of Tim Burton, who
exactly.
this was his first time getting to direct a major studio feature film.
Yeah. Burton came out of Disney. He didn't last long in the first phase at Disney. Made some pictures that were quite within the Disney image, but yet were too weird for Disney at the time. We're
Yeah, of
talking about Vincent and Frankenweenie,
course. Yeah.
which I'm sure you've seen.
Yes.
Perfectly suited for Pee-wee. He would be perfectly suited for Batman by a similar stretch of imagination.
Yeah.
And a lot of people still are amazed that the director of Pee-wee's Adventure went on to become acclaimed as a very inventive general purpose director, still specializing in weird business.
Yeah. Well, you think of all those
And Pee-wee
amazing.
is a very weird film.
Oh, yeah, oh, absolutely. But like you look at that trajectory, all those amazing movies like Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood. I mean, you name it. This great Sleepy Hollow, this great career. Not just Burton, but even Danny Elfman and all those amazing behind the scenes people.
Elfman is a Elfman is a
Yeah.
miracle unto himself.
I mean, they're all brilliant, but just to think, because Paul Rubens was willing to take a chance on these unknown kids, that we have this amazing body of work.
Yeah, hard to think of Rubens as anything but a kid, and yet in person he was, as I've said, very serious and scholarly. But an adventurous intellect. What kind of personality does it take to go out with an unconventional act like Pee Wee Herman, inflict or impose or bestow it upon the general public, knowing that one slip and you'd fall on your face?
Yeah. Which, I mean, in the public, eventually it happened, but thankfully he was able to have a comeback and bounce back from any personal indiscretions, I think.
Yeah, his loyalty to the character of Pee Wee Herman was such that he was able to, even so late in life, not to say that his age at passing was extreme. I mean, he was still a kid at heart. He was able to go back to Pee Wee and play him just as richly as he had in Big Adventure over a generation earlier.
And I think Pee Wee's Big Holiday is a lot of fun too. I thought he did a good job being able to make the character. Well, it's certainly a timeless character. I think it works in any generation, right?
Oh, yeah, he's got enough. He's got the gumption not to make Pee Wee so nice that he becomes suffering.
Yeah.
Oh, that boy's got a temper, and that's a beautiful thing.
And that's realistic, right? What kid
It's
doesn't?
right, and he loses his temper in amusing ways. So that's consistent, and I think the audience in for a big thrill.
Oh, absolutely. I know this is sort of pretentious, and I mean, is it really for any of us to say? But what do you think Paul Rubens' legacy? How do you think he will be remembered in the generations to come?
Um, I think he'll be remembered for a body of work that includes Pee Wee Herman as a centerpiece. But look at what he did with look at what he did with Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, this is an actor of some depth. And imagine what he might have done with What Makes Sammy Run.
Well, see, well, it's funny you bring that up too, because even Pee Wee's Big Adventure, what is it if not a restaging of Bicycle Thieves, right? The famous Italian
Ah,
neo-realist film. So,
definitely, Vittorio De.
yeah, an amazing film. Do you have any closing thoughts on the film Pee Wee's Big Adventure?
I think it's time for me to shut up and roll that movie.
We know it, we love it. Without further ado, from 1985, directed by Tim Burton, Pee Wee's Big Adventure.